Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Today, I'm going to discuss about the topic of integrating Indigenous knowledge in science education to promote sustainability and intercultural learning, which is part of my doctoral research. It will talk about two big topics, including Indigenous knowledge and sustainable development, and how their implication in science learning. This is the outline of my presentation. I will start with introduction and then discuss about IK and education for sustainable development. In the end, we will discuss about how IK can be adapted in science education and their implication in science learning in Indonesia. One of the main problems in science education, which has not yet been fully solved, is the perception of the student that their science lessons are not very relevant. The main factor for the missing perception of relevance is suggested in a lack of connection of the teaching of science to everyday life of the student and society. As we know that science is practiced based on natural and environmental resources in any given cultural and socioeconomic context. However, the picture of science represented in many textbooks all over the world often neglect its cultural component or restrict it to Western view on the history of science. To raise the relevance of science learning education, science teaching requires new ways in the curriculum and pedagogy beyond learning the science theories and facts. Accordingly, it is important to implement new topics and pedagogies to change the teacher education program. One source for such new pedagogical approach is sustainability thinking and action, and a corresponding related education paradigm, which is called Education for Sustainable Development, or ESD. And for the new topic or context that can be addressed is indigenous knowledge, which is based on science of local culture. As Ogawa stated, that every culture has its own science that we call indigenous science. Indigenous culture and the culture of Western modern science may complement each other in student everyday work experiences. As we know that indigenous knowledge can be defined as a local knowledge held by indigenous people, or local knowledge unique to a particular culture or society. There are a lot of scholars who define this knowledge differently, including indigenous science, ethnoscience, traditional economic knowledge, and others. Despite there are some different perspectives of scholars who define this knowledge system, I believe that this distinction simply serves as a way to distinguish between highly heterogeneous groups and their ways of knowing nature. This is my example of IK, which is commonly found in a traditional community around the world. Commonly, application of IK is related to the utilization of natural resources to fulfill their needs in the field of agriculture. One of the examples is the use of organic fertilizer or using natural pesticide for dairy plant like neem plant for biopesticide. IK also has a big contribution to the development of scientific and technology. For example, this is an article that tells about the indigenous people in Indonesia. We call them Bajau tribe or Bajau people, who has the ability to hold breath underwater for more than 13 minutes. So we call them superhuman divers. So the question is, how could they do that? It was revealed that Bajau people has unusual big spleens that can supply an extra boost of oxygen in a red blood cell because of a kind of gene or DNA evolution. This could be possible because for generations, they have spent the majority of their days by diving and hunting underwater. From this example, we can conclude that IK has the contribution to become the starting point for useful scientific technology. IK also has the contribution to reach the goal of sustainable development. As we know that UNESCO has been promoted 17 SDGs goals since 2014. One of the most important goals is the quality of education, which is to promote education for sustainable development. It encourages people to change the way they think and work towards a sustainable development and educate people to develop knowledge, skills, and values and behavior needed for sustainable development. And IK is the important part of ESD to educate people on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as to provide a foundation for locally appropriate sustainable. IK also has a big contribution to achieve sustainable sciences. This figure is a 3-dimension of science education with sustainability science as a foundation. We can see that the vision 1 say that science education for profession, which is seeing and interpreting the world as a scientist does. And vision 2 is science education for active democratic citizenship, using science to understand the world and its issue. And the most important thing is vision 3, where is the multiple perspective on scientific worldview is needed, where indigenous knowledge system can complement Eurocentric tradition. It means that sustainability sciences can integrate the multiple perspective on science worldview and accommodate the 3 dimensions of relevance in science education. And for the next slide, I will discuss about a case study of IK in Indonesia. 2 years ago, I conducted a field study in Indonesia to explore the indigenous of Baduy tribe. The Baduy tribe is a traditional community who live in the forest area in Java Island, Indonesia. They live in a very traditional way. There is no electricity there. They don't go to school, but they learn to read and count independently. But Baduy people are very concerned about the nature and environment protection, including agricultural system, knowledge system, technology system, and conservation practice. They have a good philosophy that if I said in their language, gunung teu meunang dilebur, lebak teu meunang diruksak, lojor teu meunang dipotong, pondok teu meunang disambung. It means that the mountain is not allowed to be destroyed. The river is not allowed to be destructed. If it is long, it is not allowed to be cut, and if it is short, it's not allowed to be connected. So this means that humans are not allowed to change anything that can cause damage to nature. Because the lives of Baduy people depend heavily on their nature, they are very respect with this philosophy very much. According to the result of my field study, I also found that the Baduy people apply the principle of science that we can understood as ethnochemistry, ethnobotany, ethnomathematics, and ethnoastronomy. For example, for a plant, they use natural pesticide from plant extract to repel insects. In ethnobotany, to maintain soil fertility, they use the alternating technique by changing the variety of plant after harvest season. In ethnomathematics, they build and design like a storage chamber for rice or paddy, which can repel the rats to avoid the rats to eat their rice. And in ethnoastronomy, they use the knowledge of the Orion and Pleiades constellation to determine the agricultural calendar. All of this knowledge is used based their laws and norms to realize the sustainability of their socio-economic and environment. So the lesson that we can get from the Baduy, that the Baduy is on how their science is used joining with the socio-cultural context to realize sustainable development. This knowledge actually has a rich context that could be addressed in science education to foster the education for sustainable development and intercultural learning in the curriculum. And then this is the case study how I incorporate IK in science learning in Indonesia. So why I choose the topic of IK in science learning? Because we know that every nation has their culture and their own science. And IK is locally relevant, but it has global goals like conservation, adapting climate change, and others. It has rich context and can trigger curiosity because it's sometimes related with unique culture from a society. And the most important thing that it can promote education for sustainable development and intercultural learning. Based on my recent study, this is the educational design framework that I use to incorporate indigenous science with science education. This framework integrates the perspective of Western and indigenous science to develop the science learning curricula. And then we can analyze the perspective from the teacher, the student, as well as we can analyze the science content structure and the social demand. And finally, we use the analysis result to develop, implement, and evaluate the lesson. To make science learning more meaningful, the content and context of science learning that can be learned from indigenous science is connected to socio-critical and sustainability-oriented issues. For example, we can link the context and content science from indigenous science with the issue of climate change, biodiversity, or the issue of synthetic pesticide and chemical pollution, maybe. It is possible. And this is the example. In this table, I exemplify a learning case study by taking one of the themes of agriculture that the Baduy community established. From this theme, it is known that the Baduy people use like a noni fruit extract as a natural pesticide. Furthermore, we explore the concept of science that can be learned related with the concept of chemistry and biology. From that context and concept, we further connect with the sustainability issues. For example, the issue of the use of synthetic pesticide versus alternative natural pesticide from indigenous materials. And we can input the aspect of the sustainability that can be learned from the science learning. And last year, I conducted a case study of integrating IK and Western science in chemistry learning. So a teaching intervention is conducted at the high school and undergraduate level in Indonesia with a total around 113 students. The context or issue rises is about the issue of the use of pesticides in agriculture and the alternative pesticide from indigenous materials. The teaching intervention is carried out for more than 2 hours with the following learning sequence. First, I introduce the context, and then discussing the sustainability issue and fostering argumentation skill of the student. And then finally, I evaluating the science and concept related to the context or issues. First, when I introduce the context, I play like a video about the global issue of pesticide, which is about the pros and cons of pesticides. And then I initiated indigenous perspective on the use of natural pesticide from indigenous community in Indonesia, which is Baduy tribe. This initiation is done by playing a video and providing an article on the use of natural pesticide in Baduy. This article also discusses about the Baduy culture of their traditional ceremonies performed during the growing season, as well as the philosophy held by Baduy people to preserve their nature. In the next session, the students were introduced in a sustainability issue of pesticide by analyzing the controversial issue question, like considering all the risks of synthetic pesticide, should we ban synthetic pesticide and start using green pesticides such indigenous pesticides? And in this session, students were given the opportunity to present their positions and argue on the issue along with the arguments supporting the position. And the teacher has the role to direct the student opinions and emphasize that the importance of considering pesticide use wisely and considering the long-term effect. In the final session, the teacher evaluates the student by giving a questionnaire about chemical problem solving that link the concept of chemistry to social, personal, and professional context. For example, in this table, in social context, the question is related to the issue of the use of DDT pesticides against the environment. And in personal context, the question is related to the issue of the use of DDT with DDT pesticides that are harmful to people's health. And in a professional context, the question is related to how the student can describe the chemical phenomenon about indigenous science in Baduy tribe from scientific point of view. After the teaching intervention ends, the students were asked to give feedback about the lesson by filling out a Likert-based questionnaire. So in the questionnaire, the Likert-based item focus on student interest, their motivation for the topic, their concern about sustainability, and the perspective for indigenous science and water science to work together to solve sustainability issues and promoting intercultural learning. And our findings indicate that the student perception for the lesson was very positive and that the lesson was considered to be interesting and relevant for them. And this is also the feedback of the student based on open-ended questionnaire, which is focused on the student opinion regarding the both topic and overall learning process. So this is the word cloud analysis, visualize the words that the student use to express their feedback. The words of interesting topic, interesting lessons, open insight, environmental care are words that were often mentioned by both of group of students. This means that learning can add student insight and it is very interesting to them. Further analysis of the student attitudes was carried out based on the sentiment analysis based on the open-ended questionnaire. The result indicate that both of them have the positive attitude toward the lesson. Okay, this is my final presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Robbie, for a great presentation. I know there are many questions. I do have some questions, but let's hold on to it. And we will hear from Yifan and then open it up for all of us for Q&A. And for all the participants, if you have questions, please type in the chat window and we will bring this up to the attention of the speakers after their presentations. Okay, Yifan, floor is yours.
Thank you, Robbie, and thank you for organizing, and thank you for the SIG to invite me and give this talk here. And yeah, can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Brilliant. So let me see. Okay. So what I'm going to share today is, so first of all, I'm Yifan, as introduced, and currently I'm lecturing in Steiner University in Norway. And today what I'm going to share is my PhD research that I have done during the past 4 years. I only just recently finished my PhD in the early of 2020, which is this year. So everything is still quite fresh. Yeah, so how my topic is connected to the SIG is actually the concept of Tao is an indigenous religio-philosophical tradition that has shaped Chinese life for more than 2,000 years in China. And in this presentation, what I'm trying to argue is that Steiner education the recent Steiner education movement in China is offering a potential pathway for Chinese people to reconnect to the aspects of their own traditional ways of being, which has becoming disembedded in the course of the modernization process. I'd like to start with my personal experience of what motivated me to do this research on this Steiner movement in China. Perhaps a lot of you still don't know about Steiner education, which I will elaborate later, explain later what that is. So, and I personally grew up in China in this mainstream education system. And as you can see from the screen, this was just like how I experienced my high school. And a lot of it is about scoring, exams, ranking, and competition. And one incident that really made me to question the education systems in China is that two of my classmates in the high school committed suicide. And that was a time when I started to question, what is the fundamental purpose of education and what has gone wrong? And since then, I developed an interest in searching a more holistic way of educating people. And I myself, after graduating from university, also joined rat race in banking, investment banking, and then I took years trying to re-educate myself or de-educate myself from the imprint that I had from this mainstream education system in China. So I literally, during my hitchhiking, so I literally hitchhiked from China to Cambridge when I came to Cambridge for my master's and the PhD. And that's when I discovered holistic, more alternative education, Steiner education, and I gradually had this interest, and that brought me to think maybe I wanted to spend some years looking at holistic education. So Steiner education is one holistic way to educate. At the same time, I discovered there is a Steiner fever going on in China. When I say fever, it literally means there is a rapid increase, rapid expansion of Steiner education in China. And it's not just Steiner education, it's also homeschooling, Montessori, Reggio Emilia, different types of alternative education are expanding in China. There is a need for that. And as you can see from the screen, so in the previous, so it's about the first Steiner school in China was founded in 2004. So right now it's about 16 years. And among the 16, so during the 16 years, right now there are more than 80 Steiner schools and more than 400 Steiner kindergartens. And what's really fascinating is most of them, they're unlicensed. And so in China, things doesn't happen in black and white. Many of things take place in the gray area. And so, and what's also really interesting is like the biggest and earliest Steiner school, Chengdu Steiner School, it actually has a 5 years wait list to enter. So a lot of people wanted to enter, but a lot of parents want to send their children there, but they don't get a space. So many of the parents are saying, oh, well, I'm just gonna set up my own Steiner school then. So that's how you can see there's a lot of Steiner schools mushrooming in China. And people say that it's almost like a grassroots moms self-help movement to find ideal education for their children. And I find that like very interesting, intriguing. So here are some pictures of the Steiner schools in China. So you can see, let me see. So you can see the Steiner schools in Beijing, and some are located in the rural area, like this one is in Shanxi province, and another one in Guangzhou. And what is Steiner education then? So Steiner education is all about this wholeness, this whole child education. Sorry. So it's about educating the head, heart, and hands. So not just the intellects, but also the heart and the hands, which is thinking, feeling, and willing in their terms. And there's a lot of there's a great focus on the art, aesthetics, and the nature connection. They have a lot of outdoor activities, and they really value the relationship between the teachers and the child and the children. Let me see, I thought I had a slide about Rudolf Steiner. Well, that's fine. So Steiner education is developed by Austrian philosopher, educator called Rudolf Steiner. So the first Steiner school was in 1919, founded in Germany. So it's been 100 years now. And what I was looking at during my research is what is the significance of this rapid rise of Steiner education in China. So how I phrased it is what is at stake in this feverish manner in which Steiner education has been embraced in China. So why are those parents quit their jobs in the city and move to the countryside on the edge of the city and start a new way of living? Some of them, they open organic farms and they want to embrace a more holistic way of holistic lifestyle. So I was very fascinated by the significance of that. And in this talk, I'm mainly looking at the research question 3, which is how these people in the Steiner movement perceive the relationship between the Steiner education principles and the traditional Chinese values. And the reason I use the Steiner fever is actually, the term is actually termed by a Steiner school founder, and I thought that was fascinating because fever itself in traditional Chinese medicine, which is indigenous knowledge in China, is not considered as a bad thing at all. It's actually considered as a sign of the body, a sign of health. It's a sign that the body is trying to heal itself. So the body is trying to fight an illness or infection. So I thought this metaphor is interesting because then we can perhaps consider Chinese education system as a patient that is sick, and perhaps this extreme feverish rise of Steiner education can be considered as a symptom of a larger problem. So perhaps this rise of Steiner education is telling something significant about what's going on with the current state of Chinese education system. And I thought I took a little bit like a bold approach to do this research with this notion of Tao, to use this dialectical notion, and I used the transdisciplinary, and I will explain why I did that. I thought, so when I say transdisciplinary, a trans refers to traverses and transgresses. It's this between disciplinary order and undisciplined chaos. So the fluid nature of transdisciplinarity points to unity rather than fragmentation of knowledge. And I wrote here that you can see there's no divisions of scholarship based on the nature of knowledge in China before the importation of the Western ones. So it was only after the Opium Wars, which is in about 1860s, so late 19th century, the emulation of the Western education system and its way of categorization spread through China. So only then many disciplines developed under the paradigm of Western ones. So for me, although many people consider China is not a colonized nation, but in some way, China, I would think China has colonized itself by thinking the Western idea, the Western world is superior and the Western way of doing knowledge is superior. So, and for example, so here, for example, the Chinese philosophy as a discipline only developed under the paradigm of Western philosophy because of the prevalent view in the early 20th century of the superiority of the Western system of knowledge. So with the advanced military ideas, science, technology, and a wider dissemination of culture, Western systems of knowledge attained a universal quality that relegated Chinese paradigms to be thought of as local particularities. And actually, during in my field work, people do feel like so most people that I interviewed in the Steiner communities, they were saying for them, thinking philosophically about life was normal and healthy. And so like this philosophy is actually a type of embedded daily practice open to everyone. Another thing I used in my dissertation was this, I was inspired by Santo's ecology of knowledges. So he was trying to claim that, so he was trying to recognize the plurality of the heterogeneous knowledges and highlights the dynamic interconnections that existed between them. And okay. And here, okay, another thing I'm trying to say is, so I somehow embraced using this traditional way of doing knowledge in China for my PhD. For example, one thing I was considering was in the indigenous or in the traditional Chinese medicine, there is a saying to say, which is to say, if you want to study a leopard, you need to become a leopard yourself. So I embraced this idea to study this rapidly changing phenomena in China. So both Steiner education and the Tao recognize human beings as spiritual entities. To state this notion of spirituality in the most basic manner, which is to say there remains something unknowable in the traditional sense, in the conventional sense, yet significant about the animating force of human consciousness. So, and Taoism here, I wrote like, it refers to the way the universe hangs together in an ordered, non-casual fashion. And in response to that, the way in which humans should conduct themselves. Okay, here I also want to add that so we know that over the course of history, the measurable human conditions have been largely subsumed under scientific disciplines. So here, a view of existence which allows for spiritual perspectives, it could be said, gives space to consideration of an unmeasurable yet potentially graspable aspect to human condition. And in my research, I used ethnographic work approach. So I spent 10 months in total in 2 Steiner school communities, one in Beijing, one in Chengdu in China. And I used this participant observation and conducted 55 interviews in these 2 school communities. And what I also wanted to add to this is what's also interesting is I decided to take up Steiner teacher training before I went into the field, because I thought in order to use this what I said about this, in order to study a leopard, you need to become a leopard yourself. So for me, I don't just wanted to understand these participants from an intellectual level. I also wanted to experience their world from their perspectives. Therefore, I decided to take up this Steiner teacher training to experience Steiner education myself before I came into the coming to the field, which actually really helped me to connect with the participants in a deep and a meaningful way. What I found in the field, as part of the findings, was really fascinating is a lot of people, a lot of the participants, the parents and teachers, they were trying to claim there are parallels between the traditional ways of the traditional Chinese wisdoms and Steiner education. And for example, some parents are saying they want the children to become who they are, which is just similar to the Taoist phrase, 无为而治, which means doing nothing that goes against nature. And yeah, many times Taoism was mentioned by these parents and teachers, and they felt there's something similar between this Taoism and Confucianism with the underlying philosophy of Steiner education. For example, one thing they were saying is this was a quote from the parent, and he was saying this, the first 3 sentences from Zhongyong, which is the Doctrine of Ming, which is one of the 4 books of the Confucian philosophy, is saying that the mandate of the heaven is called human nature. Living in accordance with this nature is called Tao. And the cultivation of Tao is called education. And so for this parent, he can see this is just in line with what was written in The Study of a Man by Steiner. And so so from how I see it is this, they're considering the traditional Chinese values can be understood to be in a parotactical relationship with Steiner education values, with the notion of holism providing the central position around which these frameworks orbit. Which means they're not saying the specifics of Steiner education and traditional Chinese philosophies are similar. They're saying they're both orbiting around the central notion of holism. this timeless wisdom in both areas. And also parents were sharing that they felt the spiritual values was being lost in this process of modernization in China. So when I say the process of modernization, it is after the Opium War in the 1860s, and after that it was the Maoist era. So the whole period was taking the spirituality and the traditional ways of living away from the life of Chinese people. And the parents were saying things like they want the children to become who they are and recognize their spirit and their unfolding potential, rather than viewing them as resources or units of technology or knowledge. So this is like they want their children to be in this ends in themselves rather than means to an end. And a lot of parents and teachers were talking about this relationship between heaven, earth, and human beings, and this was become missing in this modernization process in China. So they consider Steiner education somehow acted as a catalyst for them to help them rediscover these aspects of ancient life that got missing in this modernization process. And they were hoping Steiner education could provide something for them so that they can reconnect to their spiritual and aesthetic roots in their culture. So in the end, what is at stake? What is at stake for this rapid rise of Steiner education in China? It is, so I was saying, it's about this offering this potential pathway for Chinese people to remember what they have forgotten in their traditional ways of being. And what is also at stake is, I was trying to say, perhaps Steiner education, like, so I personally find calling Steiner education or many other ways of education or indigenous ways of education as alternative is quite problematic, because when we use the word alternative, it's almost like subconsciously rendered as strange or abnormal in opposition to the normality of the state education model. So I was trying to claim perhaps we may not need to consider Steiner education as alternative education. Perhaps mainstream education is alternative education because it has forgotten its spiritual roots, spiritual origin. And similarly, it's just like we have forgotten that clean air was once known as air before the Industrial Revolution. Before that, all air was clean. So when you were talking to people, when you're talking to someone who lived before Industrial Revolution to say clean air, they might be very puzzled because for them, all air is clean. And perhaps organic vegetables was once all vegetables before modern farming. And the holistic education itself was once simply education. And in that sense, I was trying to claim, perhaps modern life, in this modern life, we have forgotten something quite important. So the concept of organic vegetables only become conceivable under the conditions of modern farming, as I said, which allows for a separation between the concept of vegetables and that of organic vegetables. And the fact that in modern times, we need to label vegetables organic perhaps should strike us as strange. after all vegetables before pesticides were organic. And so what modern life appears to do so well is frame a concept such as organic or holistic as something new or exciting, but actually it was all ancient ideas. And so those ancient ideas were embedded in people's life. So that it seems invisible in some way. Yeah, that's about it, and that's my sharing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yifan. This is fascinating presentation. And from both Robbie and Yifan, I learned much from both of you today. And I'm sure this panel and also people who will be able to view this later in YouTube will find it very stimulating, but also engaging in their learning process. So to all of you who are joining, please feel free to post your questions, or you can raise hand and just ask a question. So that will be fine too. And also you can type it in. Now, while we're waiting for your questions, maybe I can ask one question to Robbie. Is that this one particular slide that you talked about, indigenous ways of using or indigenous knowledge of traditional knowledge of local pesticides.
Yes.
And which does not have the adverse effect of the chemicals that is used around the world today, which is not only damage to our environment irreparably, but also damage to the health of our children, of our communities, and our own health. So I wonder, when you talk about Indonesia, I also think of what have been happening industrial scale in Indonesia, which is the palm oil industry, right? And so I wonder whether the local or government officials has paid attention to what kind of pesticide are being used, and also what kind of pesticides that locally used traditionally that can be environmentally sustainable in these communities, and also have they adapted or at least explore adaptation in terms of policy and change. And the second question tied to it is, what is the view of business? And have they expressed any thoughts? Because it is not just always cost in the short run, but in the long run, it costs more to the business too. So I would love to hear your thoughts. And again, please post your questions and or raise your hand to others. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mount, for the question. Yeah, it's a good question and a hard question, I think. Because when we talk about the issue of pesticide, it's never end. Actually, in developing country like Indonesia, as you know that mainly the region Indonesia is actually agricultural field, and there are a lot of paddy field or rice field in Indonesia, and there are a lot of farmers here. And actually, the government has made some strict rule, but we don't know the farmers still use like synthetic pesticide because maybe it is very simple and it knows. Yeah, I think it is cheaper than the natural one because you know that. But as far as I can see that the natural pesticide is start with the local community actually. So in the local farmer, they start to using like a hydroponic plant, and then they start to use to produce organic vegetables, something like that. So actually, the movement of the organic farmer is has been started. Maybe it's about in the recent 5 years, and I think the Indonesian people now more aware about to use organic pesticide or organic farmers in their life. So I think I don't know about the government, but as far as I can see that the people now in Indonesia start to do organic farming. Yeah.
Okay, I think I also come from indigenous communities, and I have seen that indigenous communities' view of their environment often differ from how business is viewed, because for business it is minimizing the cost and profit. For indigenous people, this is our home. It is that it is not just for me and my generation. It is like my children, grandchildren, and this is something that our ancestors passed to us, and that we need to take care of it so that not to damage it and destroy it. So that's why, you know, how they see from the local land or the trees and places as from the sustainability point of view, right? So I think that makes sense. Now, Romina, I saw Rebecca posted question. Could you share it? What were the questions?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was about to post mine, but yes,
Please,
yeah, this is all very excited. Yeah, I will. Okay, I will do it. There it goes. But I'll take Rebecca's first. So Rebecca has three questions. One to Robbie and two to Yifan, I think. So we'll go first with Robbie's. Robbie, Rebecca's asking if you have ever created a curriculum for the students in Indonesia right now. And Yifan, the question from Rebecca is, do Steiner schools created by parents adopt a different curriculum from the official Steiner schools? And how is the government reacting to the Steiner fever?
Okay, who first?
So, yeah, go ahead, Robbie.
Okay. Okay. Actually, I teach in a university in Indonesia, which is very close to the indigenous community. Maybe it's about 1 or 2 hours from the particular indigenous community in Indonesia. And actually, we has made a course. We call it ethnoscience, which is it's learn about the indigenous people and indigenous knowledge and how their science we can learn about sustainability from their science. We can learn about their philosophy, and it will make learning more relevant for them. And I think it can promote intercultural learning also and sustainability also. So yes, we have already made a curriculum in Indonesia to teach people about the indigenous knowledge, especially in our locality, in the indigenous community.
Okay, thank you very much, Robbie. That is, so do you have any, how far are you in the study? Like in the curriculum implementation?
Okay, so basically it's still in the process of the development because it is not easy to include a new curriculum, especially to the because you know that the curriculum in Indonesia is come from the government, you know, and we only have maybe to spend one from one semester, we can only include for one meeting to teach the people how to about Indigenous knowledge. But I think it is a good chance for us, because if they know their knowledge, or they know their traditional knowledge or Indigenous knowledge, they will respect their culture and respect their philosophy, so they can I think it's more that like we try to give them to think that this is our knowledge and this is very good for our sustainability. So yeah.
Thank you for that. It's great. Yes, you're completely right. It has to go little by little, but it's already great that's already being implemented. So I guess we can go to Yifan. Yifan, I don't know if you can see my question or if you want to answer. Okay. All right. So we'll go first to Rebecca's. Thank you.
Yeah, both are really good questions. Yeah, so China right now has been really going through like trying like the Steiner schools in China really trying to localize the curriculum from like the official Steiner curriculum, because the official, so-called official Steiner curriculum is still originated from the West, from Germany. So they're trying to, for example, many schools, instead of practicing the Steiner watercolor painting, they're trying to use the traditional Chinese way of painting. And instead of doing eurythmy, some schools are trying to do Tai Chi. So, and instead of talking about the Adam and Eve, this this origins of the universe, origin of the human world, they used an indigenous, the ancient Chinese mythologies instead of the Western mythologies. So there are some adaptations, there are some considerations, there are also a lot of disagreements about how do we want the original curriculum of pedagogy, or do we want a different one, and which one is more appropriate. So there is a lot of debate and discussions around that among different Steiner schools. And how does that government reacting to the Steiner fever? It's also a really good question, because talking about spiritual education and spirituality is still very tricky in China. And wow, so yeah, most of Steiner schools, yeah, because it's many of them, they're unlicensed. So in a way, they're really trying to develop a relationship with the local government, and there are still there are more and more regulation going on in the recent few years. So more and more Steiner schools are getting licensed and getting the license to operate. And regarding, I think, Romina, I think your question is a brilliant one. Like, I have to say, I haven't really encountered that many students from like ethnic minorities coming to Steiner school. To be honest, they're still kind of like a middle class thing for the Mandarin Chinese families. So I'm curious how this would develop if this come into the minorities groups. But I definitely heard that, like, but for example, there are still Steiner schools in Myanmar, and there are the curriculum are adapted to like a Buddhist one, or some African countries, they're adapted to the local culture. As I have presented in my slides, I think the central thing is this term called holism. So as long as this is how they are practicing in relation to the specificities of the practice is important, but the holism itself is more essential for the Steiner education to take place in a particular culture. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yifan. Yes, well, for those who can't look at the chat, yeah, I was asking if there were any cases in education, in Steiner education, with ethnic minorities in China, and so that is up for to be for being up further explored. That's great. Thank you so much. So, well, what I have, yes, Mom, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I have a question for Yifan. Is that again, this is a very interesting and fascinating topic, and congratulations on your doctorate. So yes, I know it takes many years, and so there are two questions. One is that you refer to this ancient Chinese proverb, is that if you want to study leopard, you have to become a leopard, right? And what I have also seen that often, probably more in the past, that some researchers go to study indigenous communities and may spend, several weeks to a month or two, and then come back and write the paper on their studies. I call them helicopter researchers. You fly into a community, and then you spend some time, and then you go home as if you have learned much, right? So maybe you learn some that you feel that you know a lot, but maybe there is more layers that you miss. And I think that's the wisdom of the proverb that you share, is that you have to become a leopard. So my question for you is that, so you train as a teacher, right? So can you share some experiences of becoming that leopard? And also, how do you see, say, when you were growing up in China, how teachers taught you versus also how the teachers are trained today in government school or other setting versus the teacher training in Steiner schools? I have second question, but I would like to hear this one first.
Yeah, that's absolutely a brilliant question. Yeah, going through Steiner teacher training myself was actually a healing experience, because growing up in China, part of me was, I have to say, was damaged or wounded. So what I was like, I can give you one example about the difference between the Steiner teacher training and what struck me. Was, for example, we were using Goethean observation. So this science that developed by Goethe, the German philosopher and the writer. And so in a way, we needed to be, so in the mainstream education, as you can imagine in China, like we were studying the plants, only engaging with our intellects. We know the plants, and we know the names and their properties and their, but in Steiner education, I had to sit there observing a piece of, like, a plot of plant, and building a connection with the plant, and engaging with my feelings and engaging with my intellect at the same time, and my body. So their whole, like, holistic way of doing that plant observation really struck me, because I wonder, like, if I didn't do my Steiner teacher training, I probably would only read this on the paper to see, okay, this is the Steiner pedagogy to do plant observations and child observations using this holistic method. But without experiencing myself, I wouldn't know how transformative that experience was. And when I was actually spending 30 minutes with a plant or in the natural environment or with a child, to go through that transformative experience was striking, was healing for myself as well. So I thought I was taking up the Steiner teacher training so I could do a better research, but actually this experience itself like changed me.
Yeah, so the other part of that question was, you know, how the teacher professional development is goes on in China today. I don't know whether you have studied, but how do you see these two stand, and also anything that you think that can learn from each other, or Chinese teaching, professional teaching, teacher professional development can benefit from it?
I think the major thing, so first of all, I'm not really familiar with the mainstream teacher development, but what I could try to imagine the major difference would be about how holistic, like perhaps the Steiner one could be more holistic in some aspects, especially related to head, heart, and hands, thinking, feeling, and willing. And I still see the mainstream education, this thing is very much about intellect, about thinking, but not really much engaging with this whole body, this like the wisdom and knowledge of the embodied learning and heart connection. So I wonder whether that helps to answer the question. I'm really not sure about.
Yeah, I think it helps. Let me ask the second part. The second question that I had was, so the Steiner education, it is probably couple of 100 years or so, meaning that these education systems, in fact, the schooling systems is fairly new, 300 years most, but maybe in some cases even less. So the Chinese philosophies about the holistic view is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, right? So the Steiner's education view about the holistic education, meaning that not to divide between human and nature and see them as a connected piece. In your study of the Steiner education, did you find anything that some of those educational philosophies were influenced by Far East or Eastern philosophies?
Sorry, what is the last part that you said?
That means that the Steiner educational philosophies were influenced or drawn from, say, educational philosophies in other communities in the world, including China, right? So I have not studied Steiner in depth, so that's why I'm asking the question. Have you seen this connection? Like now Steiner comes to China, but the Chinese philosophy went to Steiner before or influenced, right?
Yeah, there's definitely literature around that. Like, I hope I get your question right. So there's definitely literature around like how Steiner is drawing upon Eastern philosophies and Eastern wisdoms. And so I'm not like an expert in this, but yeah, I think there were like a few one or two books that when he mentioned that how Steiner himself was influenced by that thought. Can I also add on to what you said about the last question about like the major differences?
Yeah.
Another like the mainstream education and the Steiner education in China, this teacher development, I think another major thing I just thought about is this. So Steiner education are seeing children as ends in themselves. There's no instrumentalizing them. They want the children to become who they are. They have their intrinsic value. So the mainstream education somehow, they're seeing the humans or the children as a force for later market, for the capitalist market or human resources. It's similar to how we view a tree, for example. We can see the tree as like useful and as a resource, so we can use them as a piece of wood to make a house, for example. But we can also see the tree has its intrinsic value in itself, standing in nature, and there's in this beauty and in its spirit. So similarly, this is the difference between Steiner education and mainstream education about how they view human beings, how they view children, and whether they want the children to be useful or to become the best version of themselves.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
It's not very difficult to introduce the indigenous knowledge because most of my students is come from indigenous community actually, but they are not live in indigenous way, but they actually know about the indigenous knowledge because I think the knowledge is still preserved in our society, especially in the rural area. But in the city, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they this knowledge is disappear, but in the rural area, it's still preserved. So because of my university is not in the middle of the city, so I have not a big problem when I talk about like traditional pesticide. They already know about it actually because some of their parents are farmers and they also use it. And actually, I'm not like a helicopter actually, because actually I also can speak their language because they use the same language, which is Sundanese language. So, but it is very important for us to respect their way of knowing or their belief because you know that for example, the Baduy community or the Baduy tribe that I have been conducted study in there, they are very welcome actually for the outsiders. And I think it's not a big problem if you want, if we can speak their language actually. And actually I share the same traditions like them because we come from the same part in Java Island. So it's not a big deal for me actually to teach the student in school and how to elaborate it in science education and to teach them about the connection between indigenous knowledge with science, for example, with mathematics or with chemistry, because in their everyday life they still know about the knowledge actually because the majority of my students is still live in a rural area, so it's not a big problem for me.
And you were asking about access, right? Like thank you, Rebecca. And for me, it's I think the participants, the community can really sense whether someone is coming in to instrumentalize them or to learn from them. So I think from the very beginning, I kind of position myself as someone like I come to you to learn, and I really have a like genuine interest in finding out more about you, and I'm ready to be shifted in my views. I'm ready to be shifted in my development. I know it's going to be a transformative experience. So I think the essential thing for me allowed me to negotiate the access is I really value the relationships. I really it's almost like seeing the research, seeing the participants as ends in themselves rather than means to an end. So I know that I have things to contribute to them, and they could help me where, yeah. So I'm in this like attitude when I came in, and actually I still keep in touch with them after so many years and I'm still meeting the students sometimes online. So it's been really beautiful. Like I'm very grateful for this whole researching experience. I spent 10 months there, and so it's almost like they were a very important part of my life in that year, and also even now.
I have a question actually for Yifan, because I'm curious, because I have a friend from China, and I have discussed a lot about the education in China. I had information, which is, I'm not sure it is true or false, that I heard that any spiritual perspective are not allowed in China, especially in the education by the government. So how you face this problem when you want to develop the curriculum in China, if you want to input the spiritual perspective from any indigenous culture?
You ask a very, very good and difficult question. I think in every single Steiner education in China is facing this challenge. And in school, I have to say some part of the spiritual practices have to be taken away or hidden in some way. And it's not explicitly talked about or discussed in the schools. Like they don't talk about this spirituality as openly. So and some schools, to be honest, they have to even change their curriculums to in order to have the license from the government to integrate some of the mainstream education curriculum in order to obtain that license. So it is very tricky. And you're absolutely right, even some books about Buddhism or Taoism, sometimes it's not that easy to publish or that easy to openly talk about. But it's getting better. I'm getting hopeful, and I think over the years it's getting better.
Thank you for the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. We're getting close. Well, actually, we're on time for the end of the webinar. I am going to stop recording in a minute. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here, the speakers, Robbie, Yifan, and all our guests and their comments. We will be posting this presentation on YouTube. So we hope that everybody is on our list. But either way, we will be posting it. So if you want to I'm going to stop that now. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody.